Hey, Jerry, how's it going?
Good. How are you? It's good seeing you.
Fantastic. Yeah, I attended your performance in London several years back.
I remember meeting you afterwards.
Oh, this is the embarrassing moment where you say, "Oh, I can't." Well, yeah, appreciate that. I was with the Asian female British chess champion. She's been at the top for 10 years in a row, and it was delightful meeting you guys. And I really appreciate you spending some time with us this evening.
Well, yeah, it's my pleasure.
We've also got Dr. Das with us. And if you're not familiar with Dr. Das, Jerry, he is a psychiatrist. He's got his own YouTube channel and he's worked with some of the most complex, heinous, and emotional and shocking cases of mental illness in the UK.
Some of them have been all right, though. Hi there. Hi, Jerry. Pleased
Hello.
to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too.
So imagine...
None of my clients fit that description.
So there's been so much time since that first season of Making a Murderer. The docuseries just hit the screens and people were up in arms all over the world. There was this climax and now it's kind of gone down considerably. So my first question, Jerry, would be, what developments have come about in recent years? I know both of those poor guys are still behind bars. I've been watching it here and there, but yeah, especially Brendan Dassey. It's an absolute tragedy.
Yeah, it is. So the two cases, Brendan's is dormant right now. There's no legal case pending in the courts. There is a movement to try and get him clemency from the Wisconsin governor, which so far he's been unwilling to do. Basically, because he's got a policy that he considers pardons only after you've completed your sentence and 5 years have elapsed, which of course does nothing for somebody who's in prison wrongly convicted, right? So there's still a movement going on there. Brendan does still have some legal remedies, and I think his lawyers are certainly exploring that, but I'm not privy to any of the details on what that might be. Stephen, his case went up to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals denied his motion for a new trial. He then asked the Wisconsin Supreme Court to review the case, and they declined to do so. They have never reviewed any of Stephen's cases, by the way. Wisconsin Supreme Court ducks every time he comes in front of them. But the Court of Appeals did say that one of the issues, a newer issue that developed involving basically a newspaper delivery person who came forward and said that he actually saw Bobby Dassey and another individual pushing this RAV4 on the Avery property the morning it's discovered, like early morning when a newspaper is delivered. And that issue is still alive and can be reviewed. The Court of Appeals basically said you can file a new motion and consider that. You'd have to bring it back in front of the trial judge, see if you can get a hearing. That's the amazing thing, is that he has still not had even a hearing in court where any witness could be presenting evidence. Even though Kathleen Zellner has filed 200-page motions with factual issues that really could only and should only be decided after you have a hearing, the trial judge has refused every single time. I think she really does not want to have to go through the experience of worldwide media descending upon her courtroom, because it would certainly draw a lot of interest. But so she's working on, she just recently sent out a tweet that she's got new evidence that's coming forward along with this other issue. So we'll have to wait and see.
The wheels of justice move very slowly.
They do indeed. Can I ask, Jerry, at least on the surface, it doesn't sound like all the exposure that the two supposed culprits got from Making a Murderer has actually changed the trajectory. Would you agree with that? Do you think it's made a difference in this case, actually?
Well, some people ask, has it made it worse? Because the state of Wisconsin now has to dig in their heels, circle the wagons, as we would say in America, that they don't want to admit that they made this kind of a mistake and or that there was that kind of corruption. And so I don't know. I mean, you could look at it two ways. Maybe it's made it worse because of that. But on the other hand, without the exposure that they got, Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey would have just been like so many countless others, wrongly convicted, sitting in prison that nobody knows about or cares about.
Yeah, Jerry, is there a massive amount of money at stake here with the state of Wisconsin, for example? If they were exonerated, then other prisoners whose the same crime lab processed their cases, there would be all kinds of legal action and settlements.
There would be. Now, there's a qualified immunity in America for law enforcement that really bars a lot of money, lawsuits and damages that can be brought, but not when there's a deliberate corrupt actor, in this case, as there appears to be some evidence of that if the police are found to have actually corruptly framed him in some way, that would not be immune from lawsuit. And so, yeah, I mean, he asked for $36 million his last time, and now he's been in prison for another 15 years. So you can only imagine the exposure. And that, of course, has got to be a factor in what kind of justice he gets and their willingness to resist any effort to give him another chance in court.
And for the viewers who don't know your work, Jerry, do you mind explaining your involvement and the specific aspects that you've personally been involved
Sure.
in?
So myself and Dean Strang were Stephen Avery's lawyers in the case that he's now in prison for, the murder of Teresa Halbach. We tried the case. It was like a 6-week trial. The jury was out for 4 or 4.5 days, something like that. And it's depicted in the Netflix documentary Making a Murderer because we kind of took a chance early on in the case, before the trial, when we were approached by these filmmakers who really were students, graduate students in film from New York University, who got interested in the case, came out there and started recording interviews with various people. And we agreed to participate in behind the scenes interviews. Not interviews, I'm sorry. We were never interviewed. It was cinema verite is the style where they basically just set up a camera in the corner and record what's going on. So Dean and I would be talking about, how are we going to handle this witness or that. That was all recorded. And then they also had all the entire trial recording of it. And they put it all together. It took like 9 years before they really before the market came to them, because when this case went to trial, there really was no streaming market. The only way you would get something like this would be on a DVD from some small outfit called Netflix, which I talk about this in my book just so people can understand how quickly the market has developed. There were no iPhones even when the Stephen Avery trial happened. Netflix, there was an offer that Blockbuster could have bought Netflix for $150 million, and they decided not to. And now look what, Blockbuster Video is out of business, and Netflix is the huge gorilla around the world. So originally they were trying to package this into a 2-hour or 4-hour program on TV, and the market really wasn't there. And then once this idea of streaming came along, I guess Netflix got interested, and so that's why it took so long. But that suddenly, then it just, when it aired, it went viral, and people could not believe the evidence that we brought forward that looked like there was police corruption and a frame up and wrongful conviction, and it was insane initially. I could not walk down the street without people coming up to me and stopping me and asking about this and having this opinion about that. And so thankfully that's completely gone now. I still get stopped in airports for some reason. I don't know why, but generally I'm ordinary anonymous citizen like I used to be.
Yeah, it was absolutely groundbreaking. And look at how many imitations have come about, since, from the stylization, the music, the drone shots. But I'm sure
Right.
people are fascinated by what's happened to some of the main characters. I don't know if you perhaps have not kept abreast of everybody, but anything from legal supervillain Ken Kratz to Stephen Avery's parents. What do you know anything that's happened with anybody?
Well, sadly, Stephen's mother passed away this past summer. His father is still alive, but he's of failing health too. Mr. Kratz and I, never got along, so we don't exchange Christmas cards. I don't really know where he is at. He was on social media for a while and just got incredible bashing, and he's really sort of disappeared. The last I heard, he had moved to California and was trying to explore some possible commentator role on something, but I haven't heard anything.
Do you think he was secretly delighting in all that bashing?
I don't know. I could never figure that guy out. And I don't really want to get inside his brain and see what all's going around in there. I'll leave that for somebody else.
What about Stephen and Brandon? How are they doing? Do you think that they have some hope that they will be released one day?
I think they do. I'm sure it's very discouraging. Under Wisconsin law, once a defendant has another lawyer, another lawyer cannot contact them. So I have not actually been able to speak with Stephen since January of 2016. Dean and I met with him right the day before it came out on Netflix. We had a preview copy about a week or so beforehand that I watched, and we wanted to meet with him and kind of prepare him. I knew it was well done, but I had no idea it was going to be this kind of exposure like it did get. But I know that I know people are very frustrated out in the world and the community viewers. I know Stephen and Brendan have got to be very frustrated as well. I've represented. I talk about this in my book, Illusion of Justice, another case, not just Stephen Avery's, several of them I discussed, but one in particular where I represented a man named Ralph Armstrong for 15 years before I finally got his case dismissed and exonerated and had him released from prison. By that time, he'd spent 29 years in prison. So American justice it works at a snail pace. Once you get into the appellate, there's this real effort to avoid reversing judgments, something what they call finality of judgment. There's good merit for, and a lot of, at some point we need things to be final so people can rely on them, etc. But when someone's innocence is at stake, that should not trump the ability to have a fair hearing. And unfortunately it does. It can take a very, very long time.
I read your book, Illusion of Justice, when it first came out. Absolutely excellent. I think I left a review on Amazon UK for it.
Thank you.
And what were you setting out to achieve? I can't remember if it was you or Dean that said, there's Stephen Avery's all over the country that no one's ever heard about. Could you give the broader picture of the U.S. justice system and the poor people seem to be?
It's we have so many the good thing is the people are being exonerated. We have so many of them that they become routine. People don't even really pay attention anymore. 150, 200 a year exonerations, but people that have served decades. I mean, just incredible times, like Shawshank Redemption kind of experience. And then to get out, it's like Rip Van Winkle. The changes that they see. And there are thousands of them. There are various academics who've tried to estimate how many actually innocent people are in prison in America. And it's varied from anywhere from 2% maybe to 8%. Well, even at 1%, we have 2 million people in prison in America. 1% is 20,000 innocent people. And at the rate of 150 or 200 a year exonerations, they're going to die in prison, many of them. And there just aren't the resources. It's really sort of an indictment on the whole legal system that these exonerees are coming from law students, legal clinics at law schools. They're the ones that are uncovering these. Some journalists. So, Stephen's case is unusual, very unusual, unique, really, in one way, and that is that he was already exonerated once by DNA after spending 18 years wrongly convicted, and then thankfully he's the only DNA exoneree who's ever then since been charged and convicted of a serious crime like murder. So he's unique that way, but in every other respect, what happened in his case, and particularly what happened in Brendan's case, is utterly commonplace in America. It's sad.
So I have to ask: is there something about the American justice system that makes so many kind of false convictions? So, for example, is it the culture? Is it the narcissism of prosecutors? There's got to be something. There's got to be some sort of explanation.
There is, and a lot of people have tried to study this question. I have my own ideas. Whenever I've gone anywhere to speak, I try to, if I can find a trial that's going on, I'll sit in on it and watch. And I've been to the UK many times, and I've sat in on trials in London and Glasgow, Edinburgh, and just watching the way the prosecutors handle those cases is very different than in America. Dean and I watched closing arguments of the barristers for both the defense and the government, the Crown, and afterwards was like, we turned to each other and said, can you imagine any American prosecutor being as sort of open and civil about the problems? Well, yes, maybe this, there is some innocence. There's some question of this gentleman's innocence, but I put to you, and and in America, it just seems like maybe the culture of competition that we have. Everything is a fight. It's a win-win. It's a win-lose opposition situation in courts. And maybe it's, prosecutors are told that they're supposed to do justice. They're supposed to seek justice, not seek convictions. But when you get into the heat of battle, it's a very, very adversary system. Many prosecutors cut corners to try and get a conviction. Some of them are downright corrupt, hiding evidence from the defense that point to someone's innocence. Some of them become, even ones who are not corrupt, they often become so wedded to the position that maybe that the police have brought to them, that it's like they have blinders on. It's tunnel vision. They only see one view of the case. And I talk about this in my book, this Ralph Armstrong case that took me 15 years to ultimately get. The case was dismissed because of the prosecutor misconduct. And it was a prosecutor who generally had a reputation of being a pretty reasonable guy. But in this case, he just could not accept, I think, that he had convicted an innocent man and let the real killer go free. And I think that that's one of the operating principles that has made it so difficult in America.
It seems like the UK legal systems follow in the footsteps of the American legal system. And one of the things that perhaps boggles our minds here is plea bargaining. Because if you look at the story of Khalif Browder, how that came out in 2017, he was innocent. They said he'd stole a backpack, and they said to him, well, sign this plea bargain saying you did it and we'll let you out tomorrow. He said, well, I've not done it. I'm not going to sign it. So he continued to be incarcerated and suffered absolutely horrendous abuse. And then you've got people who are innocent. They know if they go to trial, they'll get made an example out of. They'll get some super aggravated sentence to deter others from going to trial. And they're innocent. And they say, look, you can go to trial and get decades, or you could sign this plea bargain, get 2 years, get 5 years, whatever it is. And you get innocent people pressurized into signing these plea bargains. So how prevalent is that? And how can that ever be fixed?
It's a serious problem, and it's made worse in part because of the way the laws are structured. So in the UK, for instance, we call it a trial penalty, that if you go to trial, you're penalized. In the UK, If you plead guilty within a certain time frame, which is pretty early in the case, you get like 1/3 off, like a 1/3 discount, just for doing that. But if you go too long and don't accept the plea bargain and you go to trial, then you lose that. In America, it's different. America, in some ways, it's even worse. I got a case right now, a guy I'm absolutely convinced is innocent, who is charged with a mandatory minimum 25 years in prison if he loses at trial. Prosecutor has already offered, if he pleads guilty to this lesser offense, I'll recommend 5 to 7 years in prison. Now, what do you do? You're innocent. You have faith in the jury system, justice system. This prosecutor, by making that offer, basically says, I don't think he needs 25 years in prison, but I'm still going to prosecute him under this statute that will require it if he's convicted, that the judge will have no discretion to give him anything less than 25 years without parole. That's so, and we have many laws like this that give prosecutors immense negotiating power and really up the ante for a defendant who chooses to go to trial. And many choose not to because of that. Particularly people of color, what are my chances? I had a guy whose case was reversed by the Innocence Project, and then they were going to retry it, a homicide. He got 55 years in prison his first time around, maintained his innocence all along. There was good evidence of that. I took over the case on the eve of trial, the Friday before the Monday trial. Prosecutors finally says, I'll make you a deal. If he pleads to this negligent homicide, got to plead guilty, I'll recommend, he's already done 5.5 years. The maximum penalty was 5. And so what do you do? It's like, I'm innocent. I've fought this for 5.5 years. And now what am I supposed to plead guilty? Well, I put my faith in the jury system once and I lost. Yeah. What do you think he did? He took the deal.
Took the deal because, and is that a financial incentive from the state? Because if they take the deal, they can't be compensated for being incarcerated on, if they're innocent.
There might be some of that. That's not really that big of a concern for a lot of cases, because the amount of compensation that's available. First of all, you have to show that you're actually innocent. You'd have to, and you got to go in front of a board, and there's caps on what you can get. Wisconsin's obscenely low, $5,000 a year, up to a maximum of 5 years. $25,000 to spend 5 years in prison.
Wow,
that's what the compensation.
That's not a good bargain.
No, it's a horrible. Now, if you can sue and succeed and get past all these qualified immunity obstacles, and show that the police did more than just negligence, that they were actually corrupt or something, you could get a lot more. But for most cases, I think the financial incentive is not really, the state doesn't, prosecutors at least don't really care about the money aspect of it, because they are absolutely immune, which is absurd.
I've always wondered whether part of it might also be their reputation. I mean, you mentioned how competitive some of the prosecutors can get. I've worked in the British legal system because I work as an expert witness. I've spoken to barristers, judges. There doesn't seem to be this determination to be unbeaten, whereas you get that from some American senior lawyers. They have an unbeaten, almost like they're boxers. They have this unbeaten record and they don't want to lose a case. So right. I wonder whether that's part of the culture as well.
I think that probably is part of it too. But frankly, prosecutors should win almost every time anyway. I mean, they have the ability, if the case is weak, like this guy I just told you about, he, rather than lose the case, he was able to reduce it and give a plea bargain that the defendant couldn't refuse. And I can't do that. If I've got a case that I have to go to trial unless the prosecutor is reasonable enough and the prosecutor wants to get a notch of some sort. We had another case. My wife actually was involved in a case where a guy was charged with homicide, said he was innocent, in jail pending the trial. The cops, these two detectives, go out, follow the lead that took them to Ohio, and they found a guy who actually was the shooter, the killer. And this detective, who actually knew my wife pretty well from other cases, told her that before going to the prosecutor, or rather than going to the prosecutor. And the DA was pissed. She was like, "Hey, wait, I was going to offer him a plea bargain. I wanted to get a conviction. He's innocent." I mean, come on. This kind of thing happens all the time. I'm sad to say.
Sean, I was going to ask you, if you don't mind, from your previous experiences, did you ever run into anybody in the prison system in America who was later on found to prove to be innocent?
Oh my goodness, there was all kinds of shenanigans. So my lawyer, Alan Simpson, got Ray Crone, known as the Snaggletooth Killer, off death row. In his case, he'd been at a bar. Waitress was found dead. Because he'd been at the bar, they went to him, and there was a bite on the victim, and there was DNA. His DNA didn't match. The bite mark didn't match. And the state of Arizona paid an expert witness $50,000 to say that his teeth matched the bite mark on the victim. He almost got executed multiple times. He was within hours or days. His mom almost had a heart attack in the courtroom because he was with his mom that night. She knew he was innocent. And the state, my lawyer sued the state of Arizona to release the DNA through the federal court system, and it was run through a crime lab, and it matched a predator, and it was solved. State of Arizona didn't even give him an apology. And this is called testy lying now. It's so common. What's your thoughts on testy lying, Jerry?
Well, just real quick, a very, very similar case happened in Milwaukee. Robert Lee Stinson, where a guy was convicted based on bite mark evidence as well. And the Innocence Project ultimately got him exonerated with a hit, the DNA that matched a guy who was a serial killer who had been convicted of other cases. Testy lying is where officers, look, one of the things that anybody who works in the criminal justice system, prosecutors, judges, and defense attorneys know is that police officers sometimes lie. They do. And it's often looked the other way because they think, well, this guy's really guilty anyway. I mean, we used to have these cases when I was a public defender way back. We called them dropsy cases, where cops would know that they would do an illegal search, but they would claim that they didn't, that they got this guy on the street, and right as the cop walked up, he pulls the drugs out of his pocket and dropped it right on the ground in front of him. Like, come on. And judges just bought that stuff and would deny motions to suppress. And it happens all the time. But if I could just go back real quickly to the bite mark thing, because I'm involved. I've always had a niche in forensic evidence, forensic science. My undergraduate degree was in forensic studies at IU, Indiana. And there is so many wrongful convictions based on bogus or flawed or overstated forensic evidence. And bite mark evidence is one example. It's just complete junk science. The human body, I mean, study after study now shows is just too malleable. The skin is too flexible to be able to give some sort of impression that can really be matched with any degree of reliability. It should never be used in court. And so after Making a Murderer came out, and Dean and I tried to use some of our public capital, so to speak, to join with a UW law professor, Keith Finley, to start the Center for Integrity in Forensic Sciences. And it's you can find more information online, CIFS Justice, CIFSjustice.org. And it's the only nonprofit that's really focused on trying to improve the reliability of forensic evidence in court, keep the junk science out so that people aren't wrongly convicted by the FBI, by the way, 15 years ago, did a study of another kind of forensic evidence called microscopic hair comparison. You wouldn't be at risk, Sean, because you don't have any hair that you could leave it. But what they do is they'll find a hair at the crime scene or on a body or something, and then when they arrest the suspect, they'll pluck a hair from his head, and they put it under this dual vision microscope, and they compare it. And it's always been, for decades, it's been used, and it's always been considered bogus because there's just too many dissimilarities, and it's too subjective. There's, saying that, hey, this is similar or not similar, when DNA evidence later proved them wrong. So the FBI studied randomly picked 268 of cases where their own analysts testified. This is supposedly the best and the brightest. They learned at Quantico, Virginia. And they went back and they looked at their testimony at trial, and they shockingly found 95% of them overstated or downright wrong in their testimony about microscopic hair comparison. 95%. And of those, 32 of them were death penalty cases. 14 people were dead. 9 of them by execution. Now, there was other evidence in the case probably on most of those, but to their credit, the FBI no longer uses that forensic evidence, but it's being used all over America and the state level still to this day, as is bite mark evidence.
Oh my goodness, that is absolutely abhorrent.
It's shocking,
isn't it?
Yeah. And it's a problem not just in America, by the way. Forensics. One of the issues is the independence of crime labs. If they're organized under law enforcement, and they get their performance evaluations every year from the people that they're supposedly supposed to be independent of, then it makes people it makes their evidence less than reliable. Let's put it that way. And the UK and the Netherlands had some independent labs that were doing good work, but the funding kind of dried up, and then there are huge backlogs, and they're now shriveling down to nothing, or in some places. In America, there's only one really large independent crime lab left. It's in Houston. It's fabulous. It's not run by law enforcement at all. It's completely independent of that, has a separate board, and they get applications from forensic scientists who want to do good work and want to work at a good place from all over the world. So it's very competitive. And, one of our long-term goals is to make labs more like that. Occasionally
I hear stories of crime labs asking the prosecutor what result do they want for DNA tests, etc. Is that true? Does that happen?
It does happen, sadly. And, there's, look, one of the big problems is this is a human endeavor. And, human beings that are flawed, that have power, can cause a lot of damage in the criminal justice system. And that includes prosecutors, it includes judges, it includes crime lab analysts and police officers.
And expert witnesses
and defense attorneys. There's some very bad defense attorneys out there, unfortunately, who don't do a good service to their clients. And all of that thrown together into a stew has just made a mess, what I call the illusion of justice, that people think justice is happening in the courts. Some people say that, the system is working exactly the way it's intended to do. But this illusion to keep people thinking that there's justice when there really isn't. And, there's enough evidence of that I think there's a ring of truth to it, frankly. There's cottage industry of private prisons and police, law enforcement agencies that are funded by these grants that basically depend upon them creating or charging people with crimes. And it's just on and on and on. And it's, it's a real problem. It's going to take a long time to get out of it. There are some things we can do gradually to do that. And a few reforms have happened directly as a result of Making a Murderer. The experience of Brendan Dassey, 16-year-old challenged young man with special ed classes, who is basically coerced by these detectives into confessing to something that there's no evidence of. In fact, the evidence disproves this bloody murder that supposedly there would be all this evidence. When you watch it, you'll see, or those viewers who have watched already know, This poor guy, there's just no evidence of his guilt other than his confession, which is so false, it's laughable. And yet he's still in prison. Several states after that have passed laws, Illinois, Seattle, other jurisdictions have passed laws that now make it illegal for police officers to interview somebody like 15 or 16 years old, at least in certain serious crimes like murder, sexual assault, without an attorney present or without a parent present or something, so that they're not left, sort of thrown into the wolves' den of trained detectives who know how to get people to confess, and even false confessions.
So in the UK, we have appropriate adults, and if you have somebody that's deemed to be vulnerable, whether they're young or they have like a learning disability or a mental illness, then you have to have one of those present to make sure that the suspect's not being misled by the police.
And you also have station house lawyers who are on standby that can come down to the police department and represent somebody when they're being interrogated, where in America that doesn't happen.
There was something that you said before, Sean. Have we got enough time? I was going to ask Jerry about Ralph Armstrong. So this person that you mentioned in your book, if you're able to talk about it, just very briefly, what's his situation? What was he accused of?
So he was charged with a brutal rape and murder of a co-ed friend of his who was like a friend of his fiancée at the time, and he was convicted, maintained his innocence all along. It was a bizarre case where there was only one so-called eyewitness, a neighbor who saw this person going back and forth to the house where the victim's body was found, who identified Ralph Armstrong, but only after he'd been hypnotized, and gave a description that was completely different. And they recorded the hypnosis session. And the cop is in the room, which is a no-no. You shouldn't be in there. And when he gives a description while he's hypnotized, you can hear the officer saying, "No, he was taller," whispering to him, "No, he's taller." And they get him to change his, so despite all that, the courts would not reverse his conviction. And ultimately his case was the landmark case on hypnosis. And they said, now from this part on, you have to follow all these rules, which weren't followed in Ralph's case, but we don't care about him. It's everybody else from that point on. Anyway, I fought ultimately for 15 years before he was exonerated. 60 different pieces of evidence at the crime scene excluded him from DNA. We found another, because the science had advanced in the 29 years since he was originally charged, we found a new semen stain on this bathrobe belt that was the presumed murder weapon that was found draped on her body that was used to strangle her. And he's excluded from that. And there was a partial profile, not a fully developed one yet, but we had one of the best experts in the country working on this case. This was an Innocence Project case I was working on with Barry Scheck from New York. And we're confident that we could have developed that more and maybe found the real killer. Well, the prosecutor basically had it destroyed, sent it back to the crime lab, even though I had a court order that said that the state could not touch any of this evidence without first notifying me. They sent it to the crime lab for an additional test that destroyed the evidence, and so it could not be tested. And partly because of that, the case was dismissed. Now, Ralph has really become very successful. He's a auto salesman now. I think he's moving up into like finance manager at a Mercedes, Audi dealership in Albuquerque. So, but he was like 64 years old or something when he got out, and all those years, he did sue, but he got maybe $1.5 million for 29 years. Really, they settled for that. It was a paltry sum, and partly it was that low because the prosecutor who violated the court order and had this evidence destroyed was absolutely immune from being sued for that.
Excuse me.
So, bless you.
Oh, dear.
So, yeah, I mean, that's a very, very interesting case. He's a very, very interesting man, very intelligent, educated, and I talk about it in more detail in my book if people want to learn about it. But there's many people like him out there.
This is the last question then, Jerry.
Sure.
I'm curious as to whatever happened to Len Kaczynski, Brendan's original lawyer.
The guy, well, after the case, he became a judge. Although only a municipal court judge. So he couldn't send people to jail. He could just fine them, basically, lesser, minor kind of offenses. But he lost his ability to be a judge because he got into this weird thing where he was alleged to have been sexually harassing his clerk. And apparently it's a bizarre story if you find it online, but he actually, she claimed that one day she wouldn't respond to him, and she's sitting in front of him in the bench, and he's back up behind, and he started meowing at her like a cat. She said for like 20 minutes or 40 minutes, just kept meowing, which is interesting because if you remember from Making a Murderer, when Brendan's on the phone with his mother when he first meets, or the day after he first met Kaczynski, and she asks him, "What do you think of your lawyer?" And he's like, "Well, I don't know. He likes the same animals I do, cat." So it comes back around to end up being this sort of bizarre harassment story. Now, so he's no longer practicing. He's not a judge anymore. I don't know exactly what he's doing. He had some health issues for a while that may have played into that case. I don't know. But he certainly did not do Brendan any service. When his appeal lawyers, Laura Nyrider and Steve Drizzen, took over the case, and because Kaczynski was appointed by the Public Defender's Office, he had to keep track of his time because you get paid on an hourly basis for those cases. And they discovered in the first month that he represented this 16-year-old boy charged with first-degree homicide. He met with his client for 1 hour and 30 hours with the media. So that, to me, that sort of says it all. And the federal judge that reversed his conviction pointed that out as just, unconscionable conduct. And his conviction was reversed originally by a federal judge, and then it was that decision was upheld, reversing the conviction by a 3-judge panel, and then it was appealed again to a full panel of 7, and he lost 4-3 based on sort of legal technicalities rather than the actual merits of the case. So,
well, huge thank you for joining us. We salute you. You were the knight in shining armor in this cesspit of the Wisconsin justice system. I urge people to buy Illusion of Justice. It's on Amazon. It's a fantastic book, and it's just got much wider social implications than the Stephen Avery case. Is there anywhere people can support you or follow you on the socials, Jerry?
I'm pretty active on Twitter. It's just @jbuting. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, but I'm not as on, particularly Instagram. I'm not on there as much. I don't like taking selfies, I guess. I don't know. But Twitter, I'm on pretty frequently, and I try and tweet about certainly any developments in these guys' cases, but I also try and spread awareness of other cases and other similar issues that I see in our justice system, to try and get people interested, because that's one of the things I've really liked from the original notoriety of this thing. I just loved hearing from young people who would say, I'm inspired by the work that you and Dean Strang did, and I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a criminal defense lawyer now, and that's great. That's I'd love to see more of that. So thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed seeing you again, and meeting you as well, Daz.
It's a pleasure to speak to you, Jerry.
Yeah, we love what you're doing, and long may it continue. Thanks, Jerry. Cheers.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. All right. So quite an interesting 4 hours we've had today. Huge thank you to Sohom, and please support him at A Psych for Sore Minds on YouTube. Any conclusory remarks?
I think of the whole evening, the thing that has affected me the most, was made me contemplate the situations the most, or my thought processes the most, was Nima Cates talking about the incel movement. I had some quite strong preconceived ideas about it because of cases that I've been involved. But yeah, so that's the thing that stood out to me the most. But yeah, it's been a very interesting evening as always, Sean. You get a big variety of cases. So anybody that's into true crime, I'm sure there's lots of different angles and aspects that they would have enjoyed this evening.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think I'm gonna have a hot bath now to restore my back.